Welcome to another episode of They've Got Now. This is your host, Mark Schindler. As always, before we get started today, if you have not already, be sure to go hit that subscribe button down below, whether you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watching over on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you can tell I have a guest today, joined by someone who I've wanted to get on for a while. We finally got this together. My guy, Wyatt Crozier, who does great stuff on the Hoopla blog, covering all things Big Ten women's basketball. Before we even say anything, shout out Play Society for us both wearing the exact same shirt on a pod strictly to talk about Big Ten women's basketball. Wyatt, how are you doing today, man?
Mark, happy to be here. Thank you for having me. As you said, I'm just so excited to talk Big Ten. It only felt right. And yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it was. This got spurred on. Brett McMurphy from, I think he's at Action Network now, posted something about the how nuts Big Ten football is going to be this year, and I looked at it and I was like, Big Ten women's basketball is going to be even more insane. We had, I believe, 9 of the 18 teams were tournament teams last year. Almost all of them went second weekend. Okay, that's incorrect. A lot of them went second weekend.
They were really close.
They were really good. So I want to talk about the Big Ten today because there's just, I don't know, it really spurred me. I'm not even into doing season preview stuff yet, but the Big Ten is just such a box of everything. There's just so much to dive into and think about, so I had to do it. But I will say, I was at Target today, as people in the Midwest do, and there's back to school stuff already. So buckle up because we're just about there, which is kind of crazy.
Almost August.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend on a staff yesterday, and yeah, we're done with summer session now, and we'll have a second one, and then it starts. So yeah, it's gonna be kind of crazy. But I'm gonna start off by asking you the easiest question I'm gonna ask you today. Who is the best team in the Big Ten headed into the season?
Just starting right at the top.
Yeah,
I would say with 100% certainty that is going to be not going in. I think it's one of 2 teams, and it's going to be USC or UCLA is the predicted top team. I think those newcomers, the rosters they're bringing in, it feels like they have the talent that just they should immediately come in and be the top 2 teams in this conference. Obviously, we haven't seen them play all of these teams throughout, but last year Ohio State played I think both and lost to both. They've definitely tested against these Big Ten teams, and they bring back so much talent. If you're going to make me pick one, which I will do, I'm going to lean USC as of today, right now. That top-end talent with Juju Watkins, Kiki Iriafen, and Talia Von Oelhoffen, that big 3, plus this huge freshman class coming in. I think there's enough talent there, but I could definitely hear the UCLA case. It's a stacked, more experienced group as well.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to hear the UCLA case from me because I'm giving the USC one. I think we'll talk about UCLA. Obviously, that's not meant to like them.
Yeah,
I think USC is going to be just special this year. Exactly like you hit on. Juju is she is coming in as the player that I would pick to win National Player of the Year. I thought it was a lot closer between her and Caitlin this last year than a lot of people seem to make it out to be. And that's not meant as shots either way. Just in general, Juju is insanely good, and I think a lot of people didn't get to always see that. They saw box scores, but they didn't really see her play the Pac-12 games because of Pac-12 Network and all that box of fun. But yeah, this team is going to be very good. They have, I think, what I'm most excited about is like you mentioned, that freshman class. I think so often when you talk about freshmen, you're there's going to be inconsistency. You're not sure what it's going to look like. This is just a different group of freshmen in my estimation. I've watched Kennedy Smith play for a couple of years, and she is she's going to be a star, but she's going to come in and be a star role player right away. I think she'll challenge to be on all. Trust me, how bad the Big Ten all defense teams can be, but I think she will be so good that even our media in Big Ten cannot mess it up. And she will be on it because she is that fantastic. She literally, I don't consider most players capable of guarding 1 through 5. She can do it. She can create. She can play off the ball. does everything. Like Kaylee Heckle is going to be really good. There's just a lot here. They have so many more options, and particularly ball handlers around Juju this year than they did this last year. And I think there will be certainly some kind of figuring that out, and maybe more of an adaptation from Juju than from the players around her. But it's going to start with their defense too. And we didn't even mention Kiki Arioffen, which how do we do that? And I think that comes out to an even bigger standpoint that I want to talk about regarding USC and UCLA, and just highlighting. And I will say too, I actually have a team in between USC and UCLA, which I'll get to in a minute. But I think the reasons that you and I both have these two teams right up here, and you can correct me if you feel otherwise, but I have them right here. Obviously talented, very veteran, but it's the post, man. Like, it's why Ohio State struggled with both these teams. And it's why I think a lot of the Big Ten is going to struggle in game by game against these two teams as well. Like, you have Lauren Betts at 6'7", is one of the best post players in the country, arguably was the best center in the country last year behind Cameron Brink. You have Kiki Arioffen, who blossomed into an All-American last year, is an absolutely dominant post scorer, can step out to mid-range, face up, do everything, incredibly athletic, incredibly smart. There are not posts in the Big Ten like this. Like, so there are a lot of teams, like I would say, who was the best post player in the Big Ten last year? That's like a true post. Because like I think Hannah Stolke had a case for it, but she's not really like, I mean, she's more of a rim running 4-5. So it's like not really a post. So like
probably Mackenzie Holmes.
Yeah. Oh, duh. Yeah, that was way easy. Who is the best returning post player in the Big Ten?
That's a harder question.
Because I have an answer, but I think it's Sarah Williams from Wisconsin.
I think it definitely could be Sarah Williams. Kendall Bostic in Illinois came to mind. Like Julia Ayral, I don't even know what I'd consider her position. She's just so good at so many different things. But I think that would be probably the correct answer is Sarah Williams. She's insane.
Yeah, she's so good. And yeah, so I'm excited for that. But exactly like we're talking about, like I think Kendall Bostic is an incredibly good player, really good defender, does some really great stuff for Illinois. But you think about it, it's like she's 6'2". Yeah. And I'm just going to be so fascinated to see how these teams play. And I think, watching how a lot of these teams recruited, there was an effort to go out and get bigger post players for a lot of these teams. But I'm just going to be fascinated to see what that actually looks like this year, because I do think there's just such a big difference between, what those two post players are and what the rest of the league is. So I don't know. To me, that is like one of the most interesting things to look at this coming season, because that is what's going to set those two teams apart in my mind.
Absolutely. I want to shout out Alexis Markowski on Nebraska as well,
yes,
who I'd forgotten about. She's great as well. Definitely in that conversation. I'm so excited for these two teams to come in. Like, expansion of the conference, it makes my world so chaotic. But like getting to watch USC and UCLA, I'm so excited to like fully like get to cover these teams of sorts. Like the talent that they have, and like I think like especially like USC. I feel like Juju Watkins, even for like any season numbers, her numbers were crazy last year, but she was a true freshman. And like I don't have the Caitlin Clark side by side numbers, but like Caitlin Clark's numbers were incredible freshman year and still managed to go up pretty much every year. I think she had like a bit of a sophomore dip and then up. Like, I'm curious what a Juju Watkins improvement year could look like. Probably more efficient and like having the talent around her. But like just even the thought of that, like how good can USC be if she can make even like a small leap?
Yeah, it's so cool because exactly like you're saying, I think part of what was like frustrating about the discourse this last year is it all became like, oh well, like USC, like it's USC. I'm like, but this was a program. This was that was year 3 for Lindsay Gottlieb and her staff, and that was 100% a rebuild. USC hadn't been in the tournament in almost a decade. They just had not been a top notch Power 5 program. And also, like, they haven't been that great on the men's side either. So I don't understand why anybody thinks that USC is was at that level. They are now, but like, point being, like, it was a talented group last year, but their talent was more in like we bring a ton of defense and connectivity around Juju, and now it's like, okay, we have a lot more offensive optionality around her while also raising the talent level. So I think exactly like you're saying, it's going to be really interesting to watch how that plays out. How how Juju takes another step, because I mean, coming in right away, she's my pick for Big Ten Player of the Year. Go figure. Who would have thought?
I'll agree.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. But I do want to talk about UCLA too because you just mentioned. I think where I don't, and I don't. I'm curious to see where you're at with UCLA. I think talent wise, what they added in the portal was like, I mean, very hard to beat. You had Janiah Barker, incredibly talented player out of Texas A&M, still figuring out consistency. Tamia Gardner, who I think was like just one of the most underrated players in the country last year, was so key in what Oregon State did. Um, they just add, like, I mean, you add Charlie Sledger Walker, who I think is
Yeah.
probably the biggest wild card in this entire mix when you talk about the top of the Big Ten. Um, I just have a lot of questions about how everything's going to fit together because to me, like, I don't know, like, I just haven't gotten to see some of these players be more role players and see what that looks like. Because, I mean, as we saw last year, like, if you get Lauren Betts the ball 15 times a game, which you should at this level, you're going to win basketball games. When they don't, which became an issue for a large swath of last season, they don't win games against the top, I should say. Like they were still a very good team. I think they made like again shooting ended up being an issue, particularly out of the backcourt. Um, but okay, where are you at with this group?
I think they just feel like on paper so rock solid, which is maybe why they feel like a safe, like they're going to be really good again. But it's getting over that hurdle and like being able to beat the top teams, like you said. It's that like junior four players of Kiki Rice, Lauren Betts, Gabriela Jaquez, and London Jones. I think it's just like them all continuing to just like grow as a unit, and like they're all players that can beat you on their own. I think, like you said, adding those pieces, will they be able to be like complementary role type players for UCLA? That might be the difference if like they can compete with the USC and maybe try to win the Big Ten. Weird to say, even after all this time.
Yeah, I'm not going to get used to it. It's going to be like 2030, and I'm still going to talk about the Pac-12.
I know, but like I think their floor feels very safe to me because I feel like I trust that four that they've had. They're obviously bringing in freshmen that are maybe not USC level, but still like a couple 5 stars. I think
Yeah.
3 players in the top 30. I just feel like they're such a deep team, and so they could end up, I think, surprising and maybe being able to like reach that level. But I feel like they're going to be a team that can beat almost anyone, and then they have to like reach that extra level, like you said.
Yeah, I want to be excited for it because again, like I think late game execution ended up being I don't want to say
Yeah.
an issue, but I think like that's kind of what separated Oregon State from them at times last year, and why Oregon State went a little bit further in the tournament because, I think again it was the late game execution could be a problem. Figuring some of the stuff out, and again, like that's part of being a young team where that core four was a lot of sophomores. You mentioned Gabrielle Jaquez, who I just like again she came off the bench for most of last season, and I think
Yeah.
that's what's going to be so interesting to me because she was like, I thought she was like a Pac-12 level player. I mean, like an all-Pac level player last year. Really good defender, just kind of makes everything happen across the court. Even if she's not like a super consistent shooter yet, but very much like her brother in that way. But like, I think to me, again, like it's one of the things that I always like wonder about with depth because like when I was younger, I was like obsessed with depth. I was like, yeah, they just have like 15 basketball players. I'm like, that's great, but like, how do you put everybody
Yeah.
in it together? And I Corey Close and her staff are incredibly good, so I'm excited to watch them figure that out and piece it together. But I think, especially when you talk about like on paper, everything looks really good. I just want to see how it all gels, and I think again, the biggest thing could be their backcourt coming together. Like, does Kiki Rice take another step? Does she become a more consistent shooter? Does again, if Charlie Sledger Walker is back to the level she was at a year and a half ago, then I think this is a very different team because last year, like Kiki is a really really good player, but she's like a little bit in between. She's more of a combo guard and a two guard than a straight up point guard. And I think it was less about that. It was more like I think it's just teams are so comfortable going under on her right now, especially after that like early 10-game stretch when she and Charisma shot the leather off the ball.
Mhm.
I think they combined to shoot like 30% from deep for the rest of the season. Um, and I think just like kind of figuring all that out together and getting the spacing right again is going to be so big for them, which again, that's part of why, like when you add Tamia, huge because she can shoot on volume. She's going to add a lot of versatility in that. Um, so yeah, I do want to say too, because you mentioned the freshman. I love Kendall Dudley, love Zanaya Saka. Both those players are incredibly good, especially Zanaya has made some huge strides recently that I'm very excited about. But again, like we're talking like them being like 10th, 11th on the depth
Yep.
chart, maybe a little bit
Yeah.
lower. So like, I don't know. I'm just going to be so fascinated to see how they work everything together. But I mean, arguably the most talented team in the league when you go top to bottom. So it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. I was curious with Charisma Osborne
Yeah.
gone. You were mentioning Kiki Rice. Do you think that could like potentially like make Kiki take an extra step, like not having Charisma Osborne there? Like I didn't get to watch UCLA as much. Obviously, they're a new Big Ten team to me.
Mhm.
I was curious if you think, because I know Kiki Rice had a lot of buzz coming in as well. Maybe not Juju Watkins level, but like was a highly regarded prospect. It's been very good. Do you think like it's a talented team, but do you think that could open up anything for her?
Yeah, I think that's going to be really fascinating to watch. Because I think to a degree, part of like what I mean, they were good because they're both good players, but I think
Yeah,
it was I don't want to say it was my turn, your turn, but because neither are like true like truly just like off ball players, like both are kind of more combo guards that are
right.
a little bit more comfortable having the ball in their hands. Yeah, it didn't always like mesh together completely well. So I kind of wonder what that looks like this year. Like, do you kind of how do you find stuff with that? And I think what would be interesting too is like, okay, how do they kind of figure out what the starting backcourt is? Like, what if they just say, okay, we're rolling with Kiki Rice as our starting point guard and starting Gabrielle Hawkes at the two and just playing really big.
Yeah,
I could see that happening. I could also see them saying, hey, let's have Kiki and Charlize out here to start. Who knows? Maybe London Jones ends up starting too. Like there's a lot to look at with it, but I think it's a great point. Like, um, maybe kind of like forcing the ball in her hands is the wrong way to put it, but like kind of funneling the ball into her hands a little bit more directly. Maybe that opens up things in a different way for Kiki,
yeah.
which could be really interesting to watch. But one of my favorite players to watch. She's just that like really fun, like herky jerky change of pace game. Like
She's got it. Like you,
yeah,
there's just like yeah.
yeah, she's a blast to watch. So I'm excited for that. Um, yeah. Did you want to know my team that I have in between
I would
USC
like to
right
guess.
now? Who can you guess?
It's my number three, and
Yeah,
so I think I could see the case for it. Did you go Maryland?
I did go Maryland.
I understand it because they have brought in so much.
Yeah, which I see. It's interesting because like I go on the whole thing of saying, well, on paper with UCLA, you can do the exact same thing with Maryland. I think I'm just like maybe a little bit more sold on like what the coming in with automatically having players that fit in a role could end up being wrong on that. I just am so excited about this group together. It feels like there was a lot of intentionality in putting this group together. You can see how it all fits and meshes. For people who didn't watch the A10, Sarah Tabiasu was incredible. One of my favorite players to watch last year. That was like the best team that VCU's had in like 20 years. She was incredibly good, and I'm excited to see what she can bring because to me, and I talked about this with Brenda last year, but like one of the biggest problems for this group was they really just didn't have a guard last year. They had a bunch of twos and threes who were kind of playing all five positions. And I think they recognized like, hey, this doesn't work for us. Like we need to have, yes, we like being able to play multiple and have a lot of versatility, but we also really need to have people who can create it when it matters most, and also have bigs who can guard up. And Sarah is like, she's smaller, so she's 5'5", but incredibly shifty, so good getting into the paint, really silky in the mid range. Is going to get it up from three and shot almost 38% last year on high volume. I think having a player like that, even if she's like, I think I would say she's probably more of a scoring guard than like a true point guard. But I think when you talk about like the collective passing in this group, like what Bree McDaniel figured out last year, how Cheyenne Sellers grew as a lead ball handler, like there's just a lot more there. And having that player who is like, okay, we can beat somebody off the dribble pretty much whenever we want out of a ball screen, that is so instrumental for this group when you think about some of the struggles they had last year.
They were such an interesting team last year because they had a lot of talent. They got hurt with some bad injuries, and then it kind of felt like they were left with a 7-player roster of like the same player, like you said.
Yeah.
They just didn't have a lot of like they were all pretty versatile, but there was no real point guard, and they were still not great at rebounding because they didn't have a true big either. And it feels like you said, they've kind of gone both ways, and they've gotten good players in the portal through both. I know they got Amari DeBerry. They got, is it Sailor Poffenbarger? Is that?
Yep.
Yeah, and her stats were a double double type player. Like these are the type of players Maryland needed, and I think like going into this offseason, I was a little concerned about their trajectory because this was probably the worst season they've had in years.
Yeah.
And then they had lost, I think they lost Riley Nelson kind of early in the portal time where I was like, oh no, what's happening with Maryland?
Yeah.
And they just, like every day I felt like I went on Twitter and there's a new addition that was like, oh my God. So,
yeah.
it seems like a really well-rounded roster all of a sudden. And Kayleen Smeichel, I haven't even mentioned yet, who I loved at Rutgers. She had a great freshman year, and then I think she played like half the season, then got hurt. But she's a really talented player that I think should fit in well. Maryland seems like they have like a really talented team, and like credit to Brenda Fries, credit to that whole like coaching staff for kind of finding the exact kind of pieces they needed and like bringing together a roster that I was worried they weren't going to have.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's such a good point because, again, like, I think the intentionality was really big because you add a player like Sailor who can play multiple positions but really shoots the ball. Like, incredibly good shooter, good on the glass. I think, figuring some stuff out inside the arc is going to be key for her. But, like, when you talk about what she can do around them, really big. You mentioned Smeichel, who, again, like another player who can just really create with the ball in her hands, thrives in transition. I'm going to be really excited to see her and just like, what does her role look like? Is it a little bit more condensed? Because like Rutgers, Kayleen got to do like, she did everything at Rutgers.
Yeah.
So like, I'm going to be interested to see what that looks like this year. We didn't even mention Christina Dalsey, who I love. If you ever get the chance to talk to her this year, incredibly funny, one of the funniest basketball players I've ever met, but also one of the best shot blockers and rim protectors in basketball, which I'm very excited about for adding to this group. I think to me, there are two real swing pieces. You mentioned Amari DeBerry. Obviously, like it was kind of like ambiguous why she was held out so much from UConn last year. But if she's healthy and good to go, like I think just having her size and presence, like she is very talented, has the ability to make an impact. I'll be fascinated to see what she can do this year. They brought in freshmen who I think can make an impact as well. Like you talk about Brianna Williams, Ava McKinney, Kendall Walker. I wonder what their playing time will be like, but I think there's a real chance they could get, make some things happen. But I think to me, the biggest thing I'm most excited about with Maryland is Cheyenne Sellers. Because I think this last year, it was tough because obviously, like, she just had to do a lot. And I think part of what was difficult is you got to see, like, her sophomore year was, like, the perfect version of her. She was, like, got to play off Diamond Miller, was able to run some stuff off the second side, just, like, be a really good connective player and maybe carry some bench lineups. Last year was, like, we need you to carry our offense and also bring it on defense. And you could tell it was a lot for her last year. Like, I think she really struggled at times, but I also think she had some fantastic moments as well down the stretch of the season as they pieced things together. Now with this roster like more cohesive and kind of in a better competitive mold for this season, I'm really excited to see the best version of Shy as a senior because she's somebody who I have been incredibly excited about and just enamored with her game since I first watched her play as a freshman to now. And I think, like, to me, if she's able to take that step that I know Brenda wants her to, like, that is going to be the biggest differentiator for me. And I'm a believer in it, so that's probably part of what paints my picture with, having Maryland here. Maybe I partially just put Maryland at 2 despite them not being in a lot of early preseason top 25s by 4
That's
letters.
crazy to me.
So that was wild to me.
They should be a top 25 team.
I was like, you can say, like, if somebody said, I think Maryland's the 4th best team in the league, you know what, I can't fault you. But if you're going to tell me they're at top 25, come on, man. Yeah. But
I feel like Cheyenne Sellers, there's that like the lovely cliche of like gonna like go through the growing pains and like learn something from it. And I feel like that is gonna be Cheyenne Sellers from last year. Like her efficiency went down a bit, but like her assists went up. She was a better like all around well-rounded player because she was asked to do so much. Mm-hmm. So like with all of this extra talent coming in, I feel like it's only gonna help Maryland and Sellers that she's able to kind of be a primary facilitator now, like added that to her game. I feel like with the talent they have now, I think she's going to have like a monster season potentially.
I agree, and that's something I'm very much hoping to see because I enjoy watching the way Maryland plays and gets this together. Um, do you have any other Maryland thoughts before we move along?
I feel like I once I started hoopla was like immediately when Maryland wasn't just winning the Big Ten every single year, which like
Hmm.
they did for like a decade almost. Like most years they won one or the other of the tournament or the regular season, and so I feel like I've only seen like the lower level Maryland. So I'm excited to see a potential like return to form of what they were in the 2010s for so much. I feel like this roster like looks like one of those like teams that was able to do so much damage. So I'm hopeful that that is the case.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's transition to the next part because the way that I have this set up and I've thought about it, I was like, we could talk about the entire Big Ten and that would be incredibly fun, but I also think that would take too long and we'll have to do it again at some other point. But the way that I thought about this, I kind of like tiered it out a little bit in my head and I was like, who are the teams that I could say like, all right, if things like really hit right, could play in the Big Ten championship game. Not saying they're going to win it, not saying they're going to win the
Yeah,
Big Ten as a whole, but like maybe somebody has a Nebraska run like they just had last
sure.
year. Who Nebraska was very clearly a good team, but was more like the fourth or fifth best team in the Big Ten than the team that I would have expected to make it there. So I have three more teams that I
Okay.
include in this tier. Would you? How many would you add on top of the three we've talked about?
I would say two confidently and then maybe a third.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well,
yeah.
let's do we'll do one at a
Okay.
time. All right. So in we'll do a countdown from three and then say our first team. So
Okay.
3, 2, 1. Michigan State.
Ohio State.
Okay.
Ooh.
Well, I have Ohio State right after them. So
Okay.
and I think I could have Ohio State ahead of Michigan State. I didn't really have it in order after that area, but let's talk about Ohio State because we were in
Okay.
agreement on Ohio
I
State.
love both of these teams.
Yeah.
So this is Ohio State. I think you lose J.C. Sheldon, and that's a blow. Like J.C.
Yeah.
Sheldon is a very specific, incredible two-way player. Like has such a motor that is so hard to like replicate. I think it's the fact that hopefully I was a little underwhelmed with the Cody McMahon like leap that I was hoping for in year two. It felt like she kind of was a little stagnant. She had some big games, but she also had some inefficient performances. In year three, if she can find that extra gear as like kind of the primary number one of this team, that's the top thing. I love Taylor Theory as a player. I think she's such an underrated all around talent, so good on defense. But the big one of like why I think Ohio State could is Jelani Cambridge, who's one of the best prospects in the country. I feel like she could just be a lightning bolt for this team when I watch her. Like I'm very curious to see like how their team changes. I don't know, potentially around her, or if she kind of just molds in. But Jelani Cambridge is kind of the X factor. Where like if that hits, I definitely could see this team maybe being as good as last year, but at least getting closer to that Big Ten regular season champ that they were last year than maybe it would have seemed.
Yeah, I agree because I think they're a team where like they definitely have some saying question marks feels almost unfair, but it's more like I think there's a lot of room where they could kind of wiggle around.
Yeah,
But I have them high up because I trust Kevin and his staff to do a great job with it. Like you mentioned, I think Jelani is just like you lose JC, who has like been the backbone of this program for 5 years and like the definition of how they rebranded. But Jelani is like just a completely different kind of guard. Like her first step is nutty, incredibly good getting to the rim. Somebody who is going to do a ton of stuff that fits what this group wants. And I think it's obviously going to be like a learning process of becoming like, that college level point guard. But I think when you talk about what she can bring as an immediate impactor and just one of the more electric athletes in the country, like that's going to stick out right away. Also, just she's a really good passer off the dribble in a way that you just can't replicate. It's not easy to find players like that. Um, I really liked what they did in the portal. I think what they did in the portal went underrated. They just brought in players who I think make a lot of sense for OSU. Like Chance Gray is a player who I believe I don't want to misquote. I believe she had OSU in her top 10 when she originally came out of school because she is an Ohio kid. She's from Cincinnati. Um, if you just look at her box scores from Oregon, it doesn't stand out. But like watching her at Oregon, and we'll talk about this with Michigan State too. But like just in general, like Oregon was like you really had to watch them to understand what was going on there and see, like, I think Chance and Grace Van Sluten were two of the most talented sophomores in the country last year. Chance was asked with doing a lot. They really did not have guard play last year. She was like their one guard who could do stuff last year. So I think it was asking a lot. I think she's going to be in a much more natural role here. And I also think, too, like, just playing in this offense is going to be so good for her. She is really smart making reads, good playing out of a two-player game, and can shoot. And, like, that is so good fitting in the way that this team likes to play 5 out and just a lot of read and react stuff. She's a smart defender, too. Like, she's a little bit on the smaller side, but she's going to compete. I think she's going to be a very good Buckeye as long as she's here. And then AJ Petty, like, as when you talk about, again, just upping the size on this team and getting more athletic in the front court, I'm assuming she's going to play a lot of the 5 this year. Because considering, too, correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca Mikulashkova was a senior as well, so she is gone,
Sure,
which is, like, going to be wild, because she, like, went under the radar still as well, but she was so good last year. Like,
he made a huge jump last year. I've been kind of like, maybe they should try Tyre Parks before the season, but I thought she played like her best season last year by a decent amount.
Absolutely. So, like, watching how they kind of fill that is going to be interesting, but I think AJ is just, like, such a different kind of talent to put in that role. Like, I think you could see a lot of stuff with them, like, being much more active in the role with her, because even, like, this team played a ton of ball screen stuff last year, but it's a lot more like dribble handoffs and working side to side than going downhill. And I think we might see some difference this year with that. But I do want to transition back to you, because you mentioned Taylor Theory, who is the player who, like, took a huge leap from freshman to sophomore year and was she made some growth last year, was like one of the most efficient players in the country. But I think this year is going to be really key from seeing from her, like, how she can keep growing into that, because again, like, when you're talking about having a player step into an even bigger role, both vocally and on the court, like, she brings all the awesome stuff as a role player and connective player. But I think there's more for her with the ball in her hands, and I want to see that this year.
Yeah, I feel like every time I would watch Ohio State, like, you wouldn't necessarily notice a specific thing Taylor Theory did, and then you'd look down and she had like 12 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 blocks, and 2 steals type deal. Like, she just fills up a box score. And I want, like you said, it feels like she's been like the world's best role player, but I think she could be like a true potential like star along with Cody McMahon, along with Jelani Cambridge if she like immediately makes an impact. Like, she only shot 6.7 attempts a game. That was the number I was getting up. Like, for Taylor Theory, like, she hit most of them. She shot 60% from the field. I would just like to see a little more aggressiveness on offense, like trying to like make some more offense happen instead of just kind of taking the open looks when she gets them. Like, she's a capable 3-point shooter. It's never been at a high volume, but like, it's proven enough to me where like she can shoot. Like, if she wants to like have a higher volume, I haven't seen any reason not to give it to her. I'm hoping in her 4th year that we kind of see that, because she's been so good at everything else. But if she can expand her game, like, that should like boost Ohio State's ceiling like another notch.
Absolutely. And somebody who real prospect for, the WNBA in the coming 2025 draft. And I think any growth she makes here is just key in boosting that even more. But I mean, to close out on Ohio State, like you mentioned with Cody, I think that is the biggest thing. It felt like she really, when this team started to piece it together after that loss to Michigan early on in the year, because they lost to Michigan, I was like, oh wow, okay, like, this is where we're at. But then they just like completely reset after that. I felt like we went from Cody early on in the year. It felt like everybody kind of had the scout on her. It was she's one-handed. She's going to get to the spin move, but we can just be there waiting for her. But then she started, after that loss to Michigan, she started making the second level read. She started seeing stuff better. She was playing more patiently. And I just want to see that player from start to finish this year, because, you have that level of player, and like, she's playing 3x3 right now, I believe. I think the world of her potential and what she can do. And I think, again, this team is going to go as far as she can take them. She's the star of the team now. So that's going to be really interesting to watch her step up into that.
I'm fascinated what her offense looks like in year 3, because I think sometimes she would like start to settle a little bit. Like, if the drives weren't working, she would start settling for like a 3 if it was left open, or a mid-range. And if she can expand her game and like become more efficient from 3, then like, I feel like it's a wrap. Like, I feel like she's going to be one of like the best players in the country. But through 2 seasons, the 3-point shot hasn't quite gotten there. And like that doesn't mean that she can't be like a tremendous player, but then she'll have to be able to adapt a little better than I think she did last season. So I'm curious. I feel like you said, the talent is through the roof. Her freshman year, like that UConn game when she just took over was unbelievable. Just like I was just blown away. So I know she has it. I just want to see it a little more consistently, whether it be with a 3-point shot, whether it just be like finding your offense and not forcing things. I'm curious, but she's now the number one option. So this is the time for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm excited to watch that play out because, again, I'll never forget watching the first game I watched Cody was they played a tournament on Flow Sports, and I can't remember where it was at, but they played USF and went to overtime. And Cody had
Yes.
like it was Cody's like first 20-point game, and I remember watching. I was like, oh wow, okay, this is a player I'm really excited about. Um, so I'm just I'm pumped to see how this what this looks like. Are they
That
done building
USF
it?
game, just as an aside, one of the most insane games.
That was so fun because it was obviously her, JC, Taylor Mikesell. Like
Like a
Taylor
10
Mikesell
point
had some
comeback, like
nuts.
in a minute or
Yeah,
something. I don't.
and that USF team was so good that year.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
got kind of screwed with how they got. I would not to go on a huge tangent, but I was so annoyed with how they got seeded because like they were so good. They were much better than an 8 seed. They played really close with South Carolina until like midway through the third.
Yep.
And yeah, that South Carolina team was
That's how
awesome.
it usually goes.
Rip.
Legit.
But yeah, first cat we've had on the pod. Let's go.
Shout out Willie.
You want to talk about Michigan State?
I do. I want to hear the pitch for fourth. I definitely love Michigan State. I think my personal, and this is not anything to do with Michigan State, I think I was burned from my Illinois hype last year,
Yeah.
where I was like, Illinois, Shauna Green. That first season was so good. Most of the teams coming back, they're going to go up. And then they didn't. I'm still very high in Illinois this year because they're all back again, basically. But Michigan State, I'm trying to like, maybe there'll be a slight sophomore slump with Robin Fralick. I hope not. That team was so awesome last year. But what is your pitch for top four Michigan State?
So I will say, in thinking through it, I would have them at 5.
Okay.
But I think I could see them at 4. That's the point. Like, I just think this team is going to be so good. I love what they do, and I think specifically with what they did and who they're bringing in. Like, I really like this. Their freshman coming in, Julian Woodard. She's in the ESPN Top 100, but like was like a little bit lower, not super. Not like a ton of hype around her. Played for a decent AAU team, but they weren't amazing on the circuit her final year. And she's just like, I mean, she is very much like a perfect player for this group. She can post up. She can really shoot. She can drive the basketball. She's a smart passer. Gonna play, pretty much every position in the front court. And one of the best like pound for pound rebounders I've ever watched at the youth level. And to me, like getting more players like that is big because I think this team had the guard play the last couple of years, right? But to me, it was more like where do they get that post player who kind of sets them apart? And I mean, they brought in Grace Van Sluten, and I think to me, like, because this team, the entire point of what they do is we draw to get the ball moving and play off of that. And their biggest issue was when they played, in the Big Ten tournament, later in the season in some of their losses, and playing against UNC in the NCAA tournament was okay. If teams don't throw help at us in the paint and we can't make them throw help, then we really can't create anything. I think that's going to be different this year because you had a player like Grace who is just like she can shoot, she can handle, she can really pass for a big, and she's going to be able to score really well in the block and also do a lot of stuff out of pick and roll too. I think adding like a really dynamic front court presence like her opens up so much more for their guard play. And I know like because people look at this and be like, well, they lost, Gabby Elliott's not here anymore. They lost Edie Hageman, and I totally agree. Those are tough losses, but I think when you look at on the aggregate of what they have and what they were able to build on top of that, I'm really excited for what this group can do this year. I think, like, again, when you just talk about their play style and how well it acclimated right away and the way that their roster fitted immediately too, I think there's a lot of room for this team to hit that next level with, especially adding a player like Grace.
Yeah, I think I think that's definitely very possible. And Grace Van Sluten is such a good addition for them. And Julia Ayrault was truly one of my like favorite players to watch last year.
Yep.
Like I know she was coming off an injury the year before, but like I did not see this level of leap coming in any sort. She was just so good at whatever like Michigan State needed her to do. Great rebounder, great shot blocker, was a pretty good 3-point shooter. And she's back again. And I think that pairing will be fascinating to watch. Like I don't know how they'll utilize both of those talents like to their best ability, but I believe in Robin Freilich after what I've seen. I think Moira Joyner is going to be a tough loss for them because she was such a knockdown shooter, and like a veteran presence as well. But she had such a great final season for them. I think like if Emma Shoemate, who's coming from Ohio State, like she was like a spot up role player for Ohio State, but she was a great shooter last year. If like I think they'll need some extra spark as far as shooting goes without Dee Dee Hageman as well. But Michigan State, like if they are as good as they were last year, even like that team was very close to being like an extra level of good. They lost so many close games to good teams. Like they were right there as like an elite team, and they just couldn't.
Indiana, Ohio State the second time.
I feel like they were often like up at half or like giving a good team a battle, and then it would just like every time.
Iowa, yeah, I mean can't forget Iowa. That was a nuts game. Yeah, up and down. It was nuts.
Let's see, almost all of their losses in the Big Ten were by single digits. So like they're close. Like they just got to be at that level again and be able to finish those games off, and they will absolutely be in this conversation.
Yeah. No, I agree. You mentioned Emma Shoemate, who was like, I just felt like, and I mean, Ohio State was incredibly good last year, so I can't fault them. But like every time Emma Shoemate played, I was like, I just wish that she played more.
Yeah.
Great. It felt like the issue you could point to was like there were times where like it didn't seem like she was always like super confident in shooting, but I think in this system, I just see it with her. I see it really clicking. I don't know if she'll start. I think she's going to play a really big role for them regardless. So I'm excited for that. I liked a lot of the kids that they brought in too. Like Sinai Douglas has a lot of potential. I don't know if she'll play a ton right away, but excited about her. I want to see one of my biggest hopes is Jocelyn Tate is more comfortable this year, because I think last year again part of the issue was like she was kind of like she was able to really get her game off at Bowling Green in a way that was a little bit harder playing up against Power 5 talent. But I think now, like, okay, you have that season together. You've seen what it looks like. You get an off season to adjust. I'm really high on her and think that she could really take a leap in her senior year, which I'm excited to see. Also have to shout out Nyla Hampton coming back to play for Robin Freilich after leaving for a year. She after Robin left to Michigan State, Nyla went and played a year at Ball State. I believe she was MAC Defensive Player of the Year. If she wasn't DPOY, she was all defense. I can't remember off the top of my head. She was very good, point being. Just like a good player who can really good utility guard who's probably going to be the first guard off the bench for them. A key addition. Like there's a lot of depth on this team. And again, they have good guard play, which just stands out. Darren Halleck was really good last year. Abby Kimball, really good last year. Like I think there's just a lot of potential there. I'm excited for this group. I think they really need Grace to step into that, like that she has to be like a star for them. But I'm a big believer in Grace Van Sluten. And you mentioned Julia Ayrault too. I think like there wasn't like having the ability for Julia to like play off of a post and vice versa. I think is going to be so big for her game, because she's like really. I mean, she thrived getting to play more at like the 4 last year, kind of 4 or 5, but like she's really more of a wing. So like getting her to play off of, having that interior presence, being able to play off that. 'Cause she's such a good passer. She reads the court so well. I'm excited. I love this group. Very excited for
so fun. State. They're such a fun team.
Yeah, they just play great basketball. So I'm very amped for that. Okay. You mentioned you had one more team up here. I also have one more team up here. You said the one that you weren't certain about. I would also say I'm probably in the same boat of not being completely certain about them.
Yeah, I'm curious if you'll say the same one as me, because there's a glaring potential weakness with the one I'm going to say, but I'm going to... Do you want to say it at the same time, or should I just go?
Yeah. 3, 2, 1. Illinois.
Indiana.
Oh, Indiana. Okay. All right.
Illinois is right in it's this big tier. Iowa's in this tier for me as well. Of like maybe, like I think Iowa's still going to be good. Maybe not Big Ten like champs good, but But Indiana would be the one I would put a little above.
Okay. Where all right, where are you at with Indiana?
So it's mainly like their guards and their wings are still, I think, very, very good. Like you lose Mackenzie Holmes, which is a tough blow. You lose Sarah Scalia. Those are like big losses, absolutely. But like Yarden Garzone is still a tremendous player. They still have Sydney Parrish, who I think is a great player. Chloe Moore McNeil is like such a rock solid, like can play the point guard if needed. But she's just a great all around player, great defender. And then they add Shea Chesky as well from Penn State, who I thought by the end of last season, I think when Ashley Wusu kind of got into the fray, I feel like she kind of took a step back in that Penn State team. But she is like a knockdown shooter.
Yeah. Didn't she have a 41-point game last year?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, she was
40. Yeah.
I loved watching her play. Yeah, I was huge pickup for them. Exactly like you mentioned, especially losing Sarah. And she's like a different kind of player. She's not the same kind of shooter. More of like somebody who can really play out of ball screens, but like just a good player. So I thought it was a huge pickup for them. I agree.
It's like if one of these forwards can step up and not be Mackenzie Holmes, that definitely would not in the cards, but like I know they had Sharnice Curry-Jelks, who transferred last year and then sat all last season, is going to be play this year. I was really excited about that pickup last year. I feel like she was a great player that they found. In very limited action, I've liked Lily Meister. She's been super efficient. If like she can make a Hannah Stolke-ish leap, that's like I think there's still a lot of potential for Indiana to be a good team. I would put them definitely a tier below like the other four that I've said, Maryland, Ohio State, USC, UCLA. But I still think it's a really talented team that's got a lot of experience and a lot of knockdown shooters, which was why they were like so crazy efficient last year.
Yeah, I also, just to add context too for where I'm at, like when I'm talking about the top 5 of the Big Ten, those are all like top 15 teams for me. Like that's not just like, talking about like, well, team 5 is like the 30th best team in the country. Like, no, I think we're talking about like having like 7 Big Ten teams in the top 25.
The conference is nuts.
Yeah. Like, so for me, I agree. Like, I debated between Illinois and Indiana, and I think that it's very possible. And I would say I had Iowa right there too. Nebraska's just about there, but I think
Nebraska's kind of there. It's hard.
And there's actually another team I'll throw out too. But yeah, so with Indiana, I totally see it. And we didn't even added Caroline Strickland, which I think could be really big for them. Can really knock it down from outside. So I like the Indiana shout out. I am going with Illinois because same as you, I very much was like, this is the year. And they just it was so funny because they had the year before. I think sometimes we make too much out of shot luck. At least people in basketball analysis do, in my opinion. Like sometimes the ball just doesn't go in the fucking hoop, man. Like, and that was Illinois' story last year. I think they had a stretch of like 10 games in like January to February where every single game was single digits and like within 5 points. And I think they won 2 of them. And it was just like, that was the kind of year. And I think a lot of it too was like Makaira Cook just did not have the same season shooting the ball. She had like some stretches and spurts, but like all in all, like they just the shots that were there in the first year were not there the same way. Makaira was still incredibly good, but it was like, yeah, that was just, it happens. I think I look at this group because particularly too when they were a little bit better down the stretch as well. Like early on in the year, Adelia McKenzie just like was not comfortable in her role. It felt like, or she was. I should say more like she wasn't super like aggressive and assertive. And then she found something in like mid-January for the rest of the season where she was just like awesome. She like stopped hesitating. She was attacking the rim like crazy. Was really good defensively as she always is. But I think having that offensive piece from her is so huge. I'm very excited for that. And I also think, too, like their freshmen they had last year played in smaller roles, but really started to shine, especially Gretchen Dolan.
I was going to mention her, yeah.
She had some really good minutes down the stretch. I was excited about her play. Corey Allen did some good stuff as well. I'm excited to see her continue to leap and take that growth. But, like, you have Genesis Bryant still. You have Makaira Cook still. Not like we talked about earlier. Not losing Kendall Bostic is incredibly important because she's like they run a lot of stuff through her on offense. Even if her assist numbers aren't crazy high, she is like really keen setting things up for them. She's their linchpin defensively, their best rebounder, and for a small group, that's important. Like, I still think like this team didn't fully answer some of the size questions, But I mean, like, well, they added Letty Vensicola, I think it's Vensicolas
from
from
Baylor.
Baylor. So they added size, but I'm going to be curious to see like how they kind of work in roles for that. But point being, this team has really good guard play. They're veteran, and they have a lot of talent. I feel like this is the year. I could be wrong, but I'm doubling down on my Fighting Illini.
Mark, I know I said like just before with the Michigan State thing that like I feel like I got burned last year with Illinois, like I put them too high and then they didn't, but I am ready to get hurt again. I
Yeah,
absolutely am. Like I am really optimistic about this being the year because like when they had that January stretch, I was like, "Oh, is it going to like are the wheels going to fall off? Are they going to start getting blown out? Like are they going to lose?" And then they won the WNIT or WBIT, whichever one they were in. I'm
yeah.
blanking now, but they won that tournament, and Makaira Cook looked like a superstar during that tournament run. And like they played their best basketball, and they got all of those players to come back again. So like I feel like there's a lot of buy-in, there's a lot of belief that like it was a bad stretch. Like we did get some like unlucky bounces, and like we can come back and like fulfill like kind of what we were hoping to do last year. Like you can only measure self belief so much, but like all these signs for me were like that they think that this is a team that can make noise still, even with no like massive additions. But they are bringing in a 5-star. Like Barry Wallace is like coming
She's
in.
very good too. Yeah.
I'm curious to see how much she plays because it's a pretty veteran like lineup. I don't think she'll start, but like she should probably see some action off the bench, and like that could be a huge spark plug. Like I think there's plenty of reason to be like optimistic for Illinois, despite kind of underwhelming after a great first year for Shauna Green.
No, absolutely. We're in the same boat with that. I like this team a lot. I do just want to bounce around a little bit. I think we could. If I had to put confidence in a group that I think will end up or could end up playing themselves into this, could be Iowa. I just really want to see what Lucy Olson looks like in this role because I think like I understand why a lot of people are like, oh well, she's just gonna step in and do it. In the Caitlin role, I'm like, dog, that was Caitlin Clark. Like it's very different. I think Lucy's going to be really good, but they're going to have to make adjustments. Like it's going to be different. Like she's much more comfortable coming in and playing in the mid range than shooting from deep, which was so much of what they do. And I wonder like how much of that's going to be like meeting in the middle a little bit. Lucy's incredibly talented, really good off ball mover, somebody who can just do a ton of stuff playing in an offense that uses as many screens as Villanova and Iowa do. Um, but I do think, like, again, like losing Kate Martin is really tough. I was still so impressed that this group was able to, like, obviously play as well. I mean, they went to the freaking national championship game last year after losing McKenna Warnock and Monica Chinano. I am good. I don't know. I'm very curious to see how they play out. I still think they're going to be very good and in the top 25 for large stretches of the season. We mentioned Nebraska a little bit. I think it's pretty understandable having Nebraska here. Like they didn't have any huge additions in the transfer portal, and you lose Jazz Shelley, which is really, I mean, she's incredibly good. But I still have them high because Natalie Potts was, I believe, up there for Big Ten Freshman of the Year. Was she Big Ten Freshman of the Year?
She was co with
Mary
yeah.
Ashley Stevenson. And she was really freaking good. So I'm excited to see
would have been
of her.
Potts, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Not no diss to
MAS, no shade.
Yeah, but Natalie was so good. Yeah, so I agree. I'm excited to see what she looks like in year two. I think that team's gonna be good, just point blank. The team that I have like gone back and forth on the most that I think could play themselves in this tier. You want to guess?
I have two more in like a tier that's like above the rest. And they both start with M.
Ooh, okay. Minnesota. Yeah.
Minnesota?
Yeah. Okay. Means even more now. But yeah, I think it's easy to forget how good this team was before Mara Braun got injured. They were so good. Like I think part of it was like they didn't play an incredibly hard schedule, but they had some good wins up there and were very competitive. The defense was awesome. But then it was just so tough because as soon as they lost Mara, that was the majority of their offense. And then it became we have to play defense like 70% of the game. And so they fell off a little bit. But Amaya Battle was awesome. And I can't remember if they were I think they were WBIT. I can't remember. Yeah. But Amaya Battle was incredibly good. Like Sophie Hart was so good for them this last year. They really didn't lose too much in the transfer portal. And I mean, Mara looks like she's going to be healthy and back and ready to go, which is key. Like, obviously, they can't afford to have injuries again this year, but I think if we're coming in and talking about this team is like, 90% healthy for the season, I think that they could be right up there again because they were so good last year. Before the wheels kind of got a little bit banged up.
Yeah, I'll start with Minnesota because that team, I was so high on them, like when they were on that run. And Mara Braun, I thought was playing like easily all Big Ten level and
Oh
like
yeah,
one of the top, I don't know, number of in the country, but she was playing like a superstar, which is kind of like what Minnesota needed. They were 14-4, and then they ended the year 20-16. So like, I don't know if the Braun injury was at the 14-4 mark, but like that was, it truly did like feel like the whole offense like started just like they didn't have an answer because Mara Braun's such a good shot maker. And again, their defense was so good. It was Dawn Plitzowait was the coach. That's her first year. Like I know that Robin Fralick kind of had such a massive first year, but like Dawn Plitzowait had a like really set like a good foundation, I think, for Minnesota, where like their defense was like night and day to what it was. And they have the young talent that's all coming back. I have them 10th, but like, and that sounds harsh, but like I think that is still like a should be an excellent team that like could definitely make the tournament. To go back to the ones as well, I think Iowa, like I don't think they'll look different stylistically with like the Lisa Bluter to Jan Jensen. I feel like those two seem like very similar
yeah,
minds. I could be wrong, but they've worked together for so long. I imagine that that'll be kind of you'll see a similar play style. But I do want to see how they kind of like spread out the Caitlin Clark responsibilities, which is to do so much. Because as you said, Lucy Olson is a tremendous player, but she can't do everything. No one can. And so I'm curious. I've been a huge Taylor McCabe truther. I think that she was so good off the bench for Iowa as a shooter, and I feel like she's going to get a larger chance to like be the 3-point shooter for them off the maybe as a starter, maybe off the bench, but like increase her role. I think she could bring like a huge like boost to them. And Sydney Falter was so excellent as a role player for them down the stretch, and like it worked well when you had Kate Martin and Caitlin Clark. I want to see what she's like when there's less like star talent around because she's such a good player at what she does, but can she like take that extra leap and like be a more top option that's still going to be like Lucy Olson and Hannah Stolke. But I think a Falter really proved something to me of like, wow, she was like a huge piece of that run, I felt. And then Nebraska was the third one because I think these are all the teams that I think is like the top 10 of sorts. I was Natalie Potts, I was really impressed with. And then I also was really impressed with, oh, I am blanking on her name. I feel really bad. The other freshman that they had was she was more of a 3-point, Logan Nisley.
yeah,
Who I thought was like really, really good up for them in the back end of that season. Hit some huge shots in the Big Ten tournament to even get to like where they were against Iowa. So I think those two, and then they bring in Britt Prince, who's another like 5-star talent who like could add something to like what's already a pretty deep team. Like you start to feel like they can replace Jazz Shelley a little bit better than you would think because they do have a lot of talent kind of elsewhere. So I'm curious how if Nebraska kind of stays the same or if they change their identity without Jazz.
yeah. No, it's a great question because I would be curious about that as well. She was so good last year, and I think most importantly too with her, like obviously the offense was huge from Jazz, but like what she did defensively was very different from this group. That I think again kind of just like went under the radar a little bit, especially when you talk about like what she did against Iowa when they played in Nebraska. Like that was just a phenomenal game. For obviously it's a team effort, but overall, like yeah, I agree with you. Um, I do just want to shout out like a couple other things. I think one of my biggest question marks for this season is going to be Oregon.
Yeah, I'm excited to have to ride that roller coaster.
Yeah, like because they are just like a completely different team. Like they lost 4 of their 5 starters to the transfer portal, but then brought in some pretty good players. Like I think um, there are like some fair nitpicks about Deja Kelly's game, particularly with respect to like efficiency and what that can mean at the highest level. But I think when you talk about like, okay, you bring in a player who's this is going to be her 5th year of college. She's been a very productive player with the ball in her hands. I love Elisa Mevius, who was
I
at
was going to bring her up
Siena.
if you did.
She
Yeah.
is like just very toolsy forward who can dribble, pass, and shoot and get stocks on defense. Like I didn't watch Sienna super closely, but every time I saw them, she really popped, especially like when you just look at anything statistically. Amina Mohammed at Texas was a player who felt like she could really do more in a bigger role at a different place. And I love their freshmen. Faith Atute was incredible at Nike Hoop Summit. And Katie Fiso is a really good player who is going to have a very good college career. So I'm excited about both of them. Again, there is like, when you talk about what the roster is right now and like meshing all that together, I have no idea what that's going to look like. I love Sophia Bell. Sophia Bell was really solid last year and did some good stuff on the wing. But again, like this team is just like they have Philippina Che, the double queen in the Northwest, who is a really tough matchup for a lot of players. Again, when you talk about a conference that is typically pretty small in the front court, that'll be fun to watch. But again, I just have no idea what to think about this team headed in. I think they could play themselves into a much higher standing than I currently have them at, but remains to be seen.
Yeah, I feel like Oregon is such an interesting experiment because when I look at I mean, I know that this is not out of the norm for Oregon of recently, where it seems like they have a big transfer window both ways, but transfer portal, Premier League all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Outside of the Deja Kelly one, that obviously was kind of like the big name. Amina Mohammed and Eliza Mevius were kind of the two that caught my eye. I didn't watch any Sienna. I won't claim to have, but I do see this big old 4.5 steals per game number staring at me, and I'm immediately intrigued by that because that is outrageous. It's an outrageous number. I'm curious about Oregon. Like it seems like it's a big on paper team of like the pieces are there for where they should be able to at least compete. They could make a real interesting like unit there, but I don't have them ranked very high because I feel like Oregon it's been in this place before. And recently, the results have not been excellent. So I'm excited to watch them, but I'm coming in a little skeptic.
Yes, likewise. You mentioned another M team. I'm assuming that's the Michigan Wolverines, correct?
That is correct. That's the last one I had in like a slight tier above like the bottom like 8, 7.
Let's talk about them.
Yes. So they lost a lot, and that's the first like concern is like if they were able to keep, especially Lila Filia, then I think this team has easily NCAA tournament aspirations, and like they still can because Kim Barnes-Rico refuses to ever miss that tournament. She's a very good coach, and I trust that they'll be good again. But it's the duo of Silas Swords and Olivia Olson that are coming in to what is now a team where they're going to have probably a lot of opportunity to like get some big minutes early. And not that they wouldn't have regardless, because these are big recruits for Michigan. Silas Swords, especially, is a top 5 prospect. I'm excited to watch these two play together. Like they've been committed for a long time for Michigan, so it's been like I've been waiting to see what this team is going to look like. And I still think they've got some like good pieces around them, despite the roster kind of clearing out. Jordan Hobbs kind of being the big one that I think will be a really nice piece as they're trying to figure all of this out. But it's a lot of belief in Kim Barnes-Rico finding a way to win like 18 to 20 games every season. And also, I think those freshmen could be just game changers immediately.
Yeah. I'll say for reference, I have Michigan ahead of Oregon. I just was speaking out of turn. But like you mentioned, I think, again, whenever you look at like box score stuff, I think it's so important to account for pace and like remembering like Michigan plays so slow comparatively. Not that it's bad. I'm just saying like, so I think people read off like Jordan Hobbs' stat line and like, she's fine. But like she got so much better last year. She was incredibly good. Became like a real efficient 3-level scorer, really smart passer, like legit big guard. I think she's 6'3", like very big. Can play defense, like does all the little things. I like her game a lot. Obviously, she's from Ohio, so have to rep her. But like you're talking about too, I think keeping her was really big. Losing Layla is a massive bummer, especially when you think about how she grew last year into that role for them. But I love what you said. I think Silas Swords to me is like one of the players who is going to come in and be very similar to like what this last freshman class just did. Like I think she is going to average like more than just she's going to average like 16 to 18 a game on efficient numbers and be really good all around. Like that's the kind of player she is. That's how she approaches the game. She's playing in the Olympics starting on Sunday for Team Canada. And not just like sitting on the bench. Like she will play a significant role for them. She is really freaking good, and already really polished. Like the thing with like, I don't know, at least for me, I feel like so many of the wings who come into college basketball are unpolished, and it's more like I can play with the ball in my hands a little bit. I have speed, and I, can do some things. But how can I become more consistent? Sal is already a really consistent player, and there's obviously room for her to keep growing. But like again, when you talk about the players who come in and make an immediate impact, that stands out for me. I agree totally on Olivia Olson as well. Like more of like same kind of player, but more toolsy in like a 3-4 role. And Mila Holloway as well too. I'm going to be interested to see what her role is. She's a really solid recruit as well. You mentioned like they brought in a couple of solid players in the portal. Like again, like you said, this team just always has something and is going to piece it together. Like they weren't a young team last year, but it felt like they were because of how new a lot of the roster was.
Yeah.
Now this year, still a very new roster, but there is more seniority in it. Like Greta Camp Schrader is going to be a senior, I believe. But they also have all these freshmen. But I agree. Like I would pencil them into being in the NCAA tournament right now because of what they typically do and what the talent is going to be.
I'm so curious how many Big Ten teams will be in that tournament because, like,
I'm counting off the top of my head right now. 1, 2, 3.
In my head, I feel like 11 could, and I would be like, yeah. But that seems like it won't happen.
I would, if I had to set the over under, I would put it at 10.5 right now. I would take the under because I think it would be 10. Off the top of my head, I think it would be 10.
One of the M's might underwhelm a little, and then like I feel like their records, even if they're a good team, is going to be like 17-15 or something, and it's going to be hard to make that argument. But I feel like now more than ever there could be an argument because of this conference.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do just have to say 2 more quick things. I know we said we weren't going to talk about the conference, but I think there's a chance that Wisconsin plays itself up higher, just because, like we talked about earlier, Sarah Williams is incredibly good. Also playing on that 3x3 team with Cody McMahon, by the way. And they brought in good transfers. I really liked Carter McRae out of Northern Kentucky. I believe I know she was, I think Horizon League. I can't remember what Northern Kentucky is. She was the conference freshman of the year.
Horizon League, yeah.
She averaged like 16 and 11. I am going to be so interested to see what that fit is, though, because she's like not a shooter. She's going to play the 4. She's like kind of an undersized big. So like you have 2 very productive post players, but like neither her or Sarah are shooters. So I'm interested to see how they piece that together. But again, like they're going to be dominant on the glass. And I think there's a lot of potential there. Defensively, the other transfer they brought in, I believe her name was Tess Myers. I need to look it up to be sure that I'm correct. But she shot like 7 threes a game last year at Duquesne and made 37-38%. I think she's almost a 39% career 3-point shooter. They needed that. This was a team that was like very devoid of floor spacing at times last year. And I think continuing to get better offensively and clear the lane for Sarah, who was incredibly good as a post-up player. Like staring at that game. Remember when before Ohio State lost in, I was like, the last couple games before we got to the Big Ten tournament, Ohio State has the game against Wisconsin. They're like down at the half, and it's like 28-26 because Wisconsin's just grinding it out. I know that they didn't have an amazing season last year, but I think Coach Mosley is going in the right direction. I'm interested to see what they put together. I think this is probably still a year where they don't make the tournament, and they're not necessarily in that conversation, but maybe they take another step. So I'm going to be interested with that. I mentioned Oregon as a big wild card. I think Washington is a really big wild card for me as well. Delia Daniels is going to come in and be one of the best bigs in the Big Ten and one of the best players in the Big Ten. She's incredibly good. They really need a lot to happen development-wise for the offense to be in a better spot. Because this team, much like we talked about with Illinois, when I was doing bracketology, I had Washington in most of the year. Like they had a stretch where they played like 9 overtimes over the course of a week and a half because they play that just disgusting pressure defense all game long and create an isolation. But my biggest thing is going to be, what does that look like now? Because they don't have Lauren Schwartz, who was like, again, Box score wasn't anything crazy, but she was their player they went to in crunch time and creating in the half court. I think Savia Sellers could really step up. She had some great moments last year as a true freshman. Anytime somebody steps up from Alaska, got to get excited because the last player who did it was Alyssa Peely, and maybe it's Savia Sellers now. But yeah, I like Tina Langley and that staff a lot. I just am going to be interested to see what this year looks like for them because they're still very young. But yeah, we could talk more and more about the Big Ten. But I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add on Wisconsin and Washington. But those are kind of like I did just want to throw those two in really quick because I have been thinking about those quite a bit as well.
I was going to say also, since you mentioned Cody McMahon and Sarah Williams, 2/3 of that 3x3 Nations League team is Big Ten players because there's also Lucy Olsen
right.
and Christina Dulce. That's right.
Yeah.
These are our Olympic shirts, actually.
Right.
But for Wisconsin, Sarah Williams is definitely like the key of like she made the leap she needed to last year for them to make another step forward. And it's like if she can continue to do that, I do have faith that like Wisconsin can get above 500, which like sounds like some sort of like dig, but it's not. They haven't done that since 2011.
Been a
so
long
that
time.
would be a huge step. Like they've went from 8 to 11 to 15 wins the last 3 years. Like so they're making the right steps forward. Like it's hard to turn around a program like Shauna Green did that first year in Illinois. Like that was truly insane. But I think Marissa Mosley's making the right steps to like get them at least above that hurdle. With Washington, like I didn't watch a ton of Washington either. The very, very slow pace that they played definitely stood out to me in the numbers. Like they would be miles away the slowest team in the Big Ten last year. And I think that's going to be a fun thing with all of these Pac-12 teams. It's just we're gonna see some different like
very different styles.
And I think the Big Ten kind of they don't all play the same version of like the same thing, but they play a relatively fast game compared to the rest of the country. Like their pace numbers are probably on average higher than any other conference, I would guess. And Washington would either buck that trend or they're going to have to change like what they do. And so I'm very curious because it's like I think 4 of their top 5 scorers are coming back. Like they're a pretty like cohesive group, even with what they've lost. So like they could, if they play their style well, like maybe some teams in the middle like won't be prepared for it in the same way. I'm interested in Washington. I wouldn't have them as a tournament team, but I'm very fascinated to see if like their play style will work or if they'll have to adapt.
Yeah, I think exactly kind of we're getting at the same thing. Like, I think they'll be a very competitive team this year, and if things really hit, maybe we talk about them in a different light and they make the tournament. I'm probably not there right now, but it's definitely doable.
Them and Oregon are very different, very interesting for very different reasons.
Exactly. But yeah, and I will say just to close out, I don't think I would view the last 3 teams as potential tournament teams, even if things like really hit right this year. That could be another pod that we talk about. I don't want to we've been here for an hour and 20 minutes. But I will be interested. I'm excited to watch every single team in this. We have 18 teams in the Big Ten this year, which is just like nuts. And I have no idea what that's going to look like. Especially too, because like now it's going to be everybody just plays each other once, or
yeah, except for I think you get one team twice.
That's so whack. It's going to be so odd to see it play out. Much like how cable is getting repackaged, we're headed back to the BCS. Shout out to the BCS. We got some absolutely insane stuff out of BCS football. But yeah, because we're going to just split. Just think about it. 30 years from now, we're going to be back to having a million conferences because this is going to start not benefiting certain teams, like probably the teams that we haven't talked about today. And then they're going to split off into different conferences. And yeah, we're going to repeat this cycle again in like 2085. So can't wait. Why? Is there anything you want to plug before you get out of here?
Just my Hoopla newsletter every Monday. Especially this summer is when I do the team previews. It's all me. I said we as if it's a collective hoopla.
It's you and your cat. Yes.
This summer is when I like churn out these team previews where I go through in my like attempted predicted order of the Big Ten standings. So I've done 2 of the teams we didn't talk about here, which is Northwestern, and I went Penn State second last, which is a bit controversial. But this year I'm so excited for this season. Like it's going to be chaos. There are so many good teams. Like this is my 4th year doing this. third or fourth year doing this. I'm running out of time. I'm losing track, but I'm so excited. This season's going to have so many interesting storylines, but please, if you want to subscribe, it is free. It is on Substack, the Hoopla newsletter. It'll be every Monday. I'll have something Big Ten related for you.
Strongly recommend everyone goes and does that. Wyatt, I appreciate your time. To everyone listening, thank you for listening. Again, if you haven't already, go subscribe to the pod, go subscribe to the YouTube channel, and go subscribe to Hoopla from Wyatt. And most importantly, have a great rest of your day. And thank you for listening.